Most Canadians trying to build long-term wealth eventually hit this exact moment. They've learned about index investing, they've decided to go all equity, and then they get stuck on the final question: XEQT or VEQT? Two ETFs, same idea, very similar returns, but enough differences to make your brain melt. Today, I'm gonna make the choice painfully simple and show you which one actually fits your long-term goals without turning investing into a full-time job. So let's dive in. If you clicked on this video, it's probably because you want a clear, grounded answer, not a spreadsheet overload or 12 tabs of conflicted Reddit opinions. You want the ETF that gives you growth, global diversification, and low fees, as well as the highest chance of building real wealth over decades, without needing to rebalance anything yourself. So instead of drowning in technical details, I'm gonna walk you through the real differences between XEQT and VEQT, the way an actual investor makes decisions, by understanding the story behind each ETF, their structure, their hidden advantages, and the type of investor each one quietly favors. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which one lines up with you personally, as well as your goals and the way you actually like to invest. Let's talk about the foundation. Both XEQT and VEQT are asset allocation ETFs. That means you buy one ETF and instantly get global diversification. You also stay 100% invested in stocks, and the fund handles rebalancing automatically, without you lifting a finger. You pay one ultra-low fee, and you never have to fiddle with multiple holdings. XEQT is BlackRock's version. VEQT is Vanguard's version. Both are built for long-term investors with growth as the priority. But once you look under the hood, the differences start to matter. Let's look at where they're actually invested. One of the biggest differences between XEQT and VEQT is how much weight they give to Canadian stocks, interestingly enough. VEQT tends to hold more Canadian equities compared to XEQT. XEQT spreads your money more across the world and slightly reduces home country concentration. So, to put it very simply, VEQT leans towards the idea that Canadian investors might want extra home exposure, while XEQT leans towards the idea that the global market is where most future growth will come from. This single difference alone changes future performance, volatility, currency exposure, and even your comfort level during market swings. Let's talk about the fees. The fees on both ETFs are very low, but XEQTs usually come in slightly lower. We're talking about roughly 0.02% for XEQT versus 0.22% for VEQT. The difference is small, but over the decades, small differences tend to snowball. You're choosing between very cheap and slightly cheaper. It's not a deal breaker, but XEQT does get a small win here. But let's look at the structure of these ETFs now. XEQT is built from the iShares ETFs, while VEQT is assembled from Vanguard ETFs, which makes sense, they're parent companies. This matters because different index providers often mean slightly different exposures, slightly different rebalancing schedules, as well as slightly different philosophies on weighing the stocks. For example, XEQT's higher international exposure means you'll see a bit more emphasis on global markets outside Canada and the US. VEQT, with its Canadian exposure a lot higher, may behave more closely to Canadian economic cycles and currency movement. Again, neither is right or wrong, really. It's about fit. Let's talk about the dividends now. Both XEQT and VEQT are growth-focused, meaning you're not buying them for dividends. But VEQT's higher Canadian exposure means dividends may be marginally, just marginally, higher, because a lot of Canadian companies tend to pay you more. XEQT with more global weight may deliver slightly lower Canadian dividends, but on the other hand, higher global diversification. In practice, for long-term investors reinvesting distributions, the difference is going to be very minimal. Okay, what about performance? Look, because their holdings overlap so much, the returns of XEQT and VEQT have historically been very, very similar. But here's a subtle part most investors miss. XEQT's lower home bias means its performance tracks closer to global markets. If the US and international markets outperform Canada, which historically they have, XEQT may pull ahead. VEQT, on the other hand, will outperform XEQT as well in scenarios where Canadian equities actually have a stronger run relative to the rest of the world. So the question becomes, Do you want more global exposure with XEQT or a bit more home stability with VEQT? That's really the real choice. What about the volatility? Well, let's look. Since VEQT holds more Canadian stocks and Canada is a smaller, concentrated market, VEQT can sometimes be slightly more volatile. XEQT with a broader global exposure often experiences smoother performance because it's diversified across more economies, more industries, and more currency environments. If you don't like seeing dramatic swings, XEQT might feel more comfortable. If volatility doesn't scare you, and I mean small volatility, and you value Canadian exposure a little bit more, VEQT might fit you just fine. So let's see. Who is XEQT best for? I would say it tends to be a better match for people who want maximum global diversification, as well as those who don't want a heavy Canadian bias, who prefer the lowest possible management expense ratio fees, as well as those who want a smoother long-term ride and who believe global markets will outperform Canada over time. If you want your money spread across the world without as much of a home country bias, XEQT is the cleaner choice. But let's look at who VEQT is for, because it's slightly different. It's usually ideal for people who want stronger Canadian exposure, obviously, as well as those who prefer a bit less foreign currency influence, and people who like the idea of more dividends from Canadian holdings that happen to pay them quite a bit, and who want an ETF that behaves slightly closer to the Canadian and US economies versus the entire world. Some investors simply feel more comfortable having a larger portion of their portfolio tied to their home market, and VEQT gives you exactly that. If you want a global exposure and don't care about extra Canadian weight, XEQT is your pick. If you want more Canada, slightly higher dividends, and don't mind a little bit, and I mean a little bit more volatility, VEQT fits you better. But look, both are absolutely excellent. Both are long-term wealth builders. Both require nothing but consistency and patience. The best ETF is the one you can stick with for the next 20, 30, 40 years without second-guessing yourself every time the market has a bad day. To summarize, XEQT and VEQT are both incredibly powerful, hands-off, all-equity ETF designed for Canadian investors who want a simple, global diversification and long-term growth. They differ slightly, of course, in philosophy, global diversification versus home bias, but both, at the end of the day, achieve the same goal: helping you build wealth without complexity. Trust me, whichever one you choose, you're choosing an incredibly strong, low-cost, globally diversified path forward. Anyways, thank you for watching. Seriously, sticking around until the end already puts you ahead of most investors. If you got value from this video, tap the subscribe button as well as like the video. It helps YouTube realize that my videos are at least somewhat watchable, which I appreciate more than you know. Seriously. And one last thing, this video is not financial advice. I'm just here to give you information and my personal opinions so you can make smarter decisions on your own. Anyways, see you in the next one. Take care.